My son leaned across my mahogany dining table and said, "I have decided to sell this house to buy a new luxury car for my wife. She is more important than you, and you have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags." I did not cry or scream. I simply sat there and smiled because that boy had no idea that I had already sold this house 3 weeks ago to someone who actually deserves it. Before I go any further, let me say something honest. If this opening hit you in any way, subscribe to Voices of Emily so you stay here with me for the rest of this story. I am putting a part of myself into these words, and I want you to walk through it with me. And when you can, leave a comment telling me what this moment reminded you of. Your voice matters here. Then tap the like button so this story reaches someone who might need it more than we know. I sat in that high-back chair, the one my late husband Abraham bought for me when we finally paid off the mortgage back in 1985. The wood was cool against my palms, and the air in the room felt heavy with the scent of the collard greens I had been simmering since noon. It is a strange thing to look at the child you birthed, the child you nursed through fevers and coached through heartbreaks, and realize he has become a total stranger. Do you know what it feels like to realize the person you would lay your life down for would not even offer you a glass of water if you were parched? My name is Hattie Mae Jenkins. I am 69 years old, and for 45 of those years, I have called this patch of land in Savannah, Georgia, my sanctuary. This house is not just brick and mortar. It is the history of a family that worked until their fingers bled to own a piece of the American dream. Abraham was a veteran who served this country with pride, and when he came home, he spent every spare dime to ensure his family had a roof that did not leak and a floor that did not creak. Life seemed normal just 6 months ago. I spent my mornings tending to my roses and my afternoons reading at the local community center. My son, Marcus, used to call me every Sunday evening after the choir practice ended. He would ask about my blood pressure and tell me about his job at the investment firm in Atlanta. But then the tone of his voice began to shift. It became sharp, like a blade that had been honed on a whetstone of greed. The first sign of trouble arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April. Marcus did not wait for Sunday to call. He phoned me in the middle of the day, his voice sounding rushed and full of a false kind of concern. "Mama," he said, "Yolanda and I have been talking. That big house is a lot for one woman to handle, is it not? Maybe it is time for you to think about downsizing to something smaller and more manageable." I brushed it off at first. I told him that my legs were still strong and my mind was still sharp. I told him that Abraham was still in these walls, and I was not ready to leave him behind. But Marcus did not listen. He never did. He just kept pushing, his words becoming more frequent and more insistent with every passing week. Have you ever noticed how people try to wrap their own selfish desires in the packaging of your well-being? My daughter-in-law, Yolanda, stopped calling me altogether. She used to call to ask for my peach cobbler recipe, or to gossip about the ladies at the beauty parlor. Suddenly, there was nothing but silence from her end. When they did come down to visit, she would stand in my kitchen with her nose turned up, as if the very air of my home was beneath her. She would spend the entire time looking at her expensive telephone, her fingers clicking away while she ignored everything I said. By the time June rolled around, the mask had slipped completely. They showed up on my doorstep one Saturday afternoon without even giving me a courtesy call. Yolanda walked through my parlor like she was a building inspector, pointing out the age of the crown molding, and the way the hardwood floors had faded near the windows. Marcus followed her around like a puppy on a short leash, nodding at everything she said. "Mama, this place could fetch a high price in this market," Marcus said, refusing to look me in the eye. "You could move into one of those nice senior living facilities in Atlanta. They have bingo and bus trips. You would have so much money left over." I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. Left over for what? I asked him. He just looked at Yolanda, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. That was the moment I truly understood. This was not about my comfort or my safety. This was about their lifestyle. Marcus had become a man I did not recognize, a man influenced by a woman who valued designer labels over human legacy. I watched him transform into someone entitled and hollow. Yolanda would post pictures on the internet of her new handbags and her luxury vacations, all while Marcus worked himself into an early grave to pay for it all. I started to notice things. I saw the way Marcus looked haggard, the way his eyes were sunken from stress. They were living a life they could not afford, and they had decided that my home was the solution to their debt. In July, they went even further. I came home from the market to find a woman I did not know walking through my backyard with a measuring tape. Yolanda was there, pointing at my gazebo as if it were a piece of junk to be hauled away. I asked them to leave my property immediately. Marcus barely offered an apology, and Yolanda did not even acknowledge my presence. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that took place 2 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other, until the front door was thrown open with such force that the vase on the entry table rattled. Marcus marched into my living room with his jaw set tight. Yolanda stood behind him, her arms crossed over her chest, wearing a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Mama, we need to have a serious talk," Marcus said. He did not ask if I was tired. He did not ask if I had eaten. He just sat down on my sofa as if he already held the deed in his hand. "I have made a final decision," he announced. "I am selling this house. Yolanda needs a new vehicle because the one she has is an embarrassment to our social standing. She is my wife, and she is more important than you staying in this old museum. You have 24 hours to get your things together." I felt the world tilt on its axis. How could the boy I raised to be a gentleman speak to his mother with such venom? He told me they had already spoken to a lawyer. He said that since Abraham did not leave the house in a specific trust, and since I was getting older, they could easily go to a judge and have me declared incompetent. They wanted to take my autonomy, my dignity, and my history just to put a set of keys into Yolanda's greedy hands. Yolanda stepped forward, her voice sounding like honey poured over a bed of nails. "It is for your own good, Hattie Mae. You will thank us when you are settled into a nice room where people can look after you." My own child was threatening to strip away my very existence for a car. That is when I smiled. It was a smile born of a secret that would soon bring their entire world crashing down. Marcus looked at me with confusion etched across his face. "What is so funny?" he demanded. I did not give him the satisfaction of an answer. I simply told him that I understood, and that I would start packing my essentials. They left the house feeling triumphant. The sound of Yolanda's high heels clicking against my floors like the ticking of a bomb they did not know was about to explode. The moment that door clicked shut, I felt my knees give way. I fell into Abraham's old chair, and let the tears flow. It was a grief so deep it felt as if my very soul was being torn in two. How had I failed as a mother? When did my lose his moral compass? I sat in the darkness for hours, staring at the pictures of Marcus on the mantel. The baby pictures, the graduation photos, the wedding day where I had been so proud. Where did that sweet boy go? But as the clock ticked toward midnight, my sorrow began to turn into a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was a helpless old woman who would just roll over and let them take everything I had worked for. They had underestimated the fire that still burned in my bones. I walked to my bedroom and pulled a hidden folder from the back of my cedar chest. Inside that folder were the papers that would change everything. You see, I had seen the writing on the wall months ago. I knew my son was in trouble, and I knew Yolanda was the architect of his ruin. 3 weeks ago, I had quietly sold this house to a young couple from the church. The Richardsons were a hardworking black family with a baby on the way, and they needed a home where they could build a legacy of their own. The sale was already finalized. The money, $650,000, was already sitting in a private account that Marcus did not even know existed. I had even arranged to rent the house back for 6 months to give me time to find a small cottage near the coast. I had the leverage, the law, and the truth on my side. I spent the rest of that night making a plan. I realized that Marcus and Yolanda knew nothing about my finances. They assumed I was living on a meager pension and a social security check. They had no idea that I had been a diligent saver and a smart investor for decades. I had nearly $300,000 in other accounts. They viewed me as a victim, but I was the one holding all the cards. Why do people assume that age equals a loss of intelligence? By daybreak, I had the skeleton of a strategy. I would not tell them about the sale yet. I would let them show their true colors to the entire world. I would let them dig a hole so deep they could never climb out of it. I wanted them to realize exactly what they were willing to sacrifice for the sake of material things. I called my oldest friend, Sister Martha, at 6 in the morning. She answered on the first ring, her voice full of that steady strength I needed. "Hattie Mae, what is wrong?" I told her everything. I told her I needed a place to store my most precious belongings, and a place to stay for a few days. She did not ask questions. She just told me she would be there with her nephew's truck in an hour. We worked like a well-oiled machine. We moved the family Bibles, the military medals, my grandmother's quilts, and all the photos that could never be replaced. By the time Marcus would be leaving his office in Atlanta, the heart of my home was safely tucked away in Martha's basement. The house looked the same on the outside, but the spirit of it had already moved on. I then went to see my attorney, Mr. Gerald Morrison. He had been our family lawyer for years, and he looked at the documents I brought him with a grim expression. I showed him the text messages Marcus had accidentally sent to my cousin, detailing his plan to play hardball and get me put away so they could clear the debt. Mr. Morrison told me this was a clear case of attempted elder exploitation. "Hattie Mae, we can end this right now with a restraining order," he said. But I shook my head. I told him I wanted something more permanent than a piece of paper. I wanted a lesson. We spent hours making sure my legal standing was ironclad. When I left his office, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. I was no longer a target. I was a woman with a purpose. When I pulled back into my driveway, I saw Marcus's car and Yolanda's SUV already parked there. They were inside my house, waiting like vultures. I took a deep breath, clutched my purse, and walked through my front door. They had used their old key to get in. Yolanda was sitting on my sofa, flipping through a magazine as if she were the queen of the manor. "Where have you been?" Marcus demanded, his voice echoing in the hallway. "We have been calling you for 3 hours." I told him I was simply out taking care of some business. Yolanda looked up and asked if I had finished packing. She told me the real estate agent would be there the next morning to take photographs for the listing. I felt a surge of cold fire in my veins. Is it not amazing how quickly people will move to take what is not theirs? "I see," I said, my voice as steady as a mountain. Marcus told me they wanted to move forward quickly, so everyone could move on. Yolanda smiled that poisonous smile and told me it was just business and nothing personal. Nothing personal? They were trying to erase 40 years of my life, and they called it business. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. When I came back, Marcus had a new demand. He told me I needed to add his name to all my bank accounts as a cosigner, just in case. He said they needed to make sure everything was in order for my future. That was the final proof. They wanted every single penny I had to my name. "Whatever you think is best, Marcus," I said quietly. He looked relieved, and Yolanda actually let out a small laugh of triumph. They left that evening thinking they had won. They thought they had broken me. But as I locked the door behind them, I called Mr. Morrison and told him it was time to move to the next phase. Let me pause for just a second. This part of the story is where things start to get heavier. and I want you to stay with me for it. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. It keeps you close while I take you through the rest of this. And if something in this stirred a memory in you, tell me in the comments. After that, press like so this story does not disappear into the feed. The next morning, the real estate agent arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. She was a professional-looking woman who seemed very confused when I greeted her at the door. She told me she was there to photograph the house for the listing Marcus Jenkins had arranged. I invited her in and told her there had been a very large misunderstanding. I handed her a copy of the title deed and the sales contract from 3 weeks ago. I told her that Marcus did not own this property and had no authority to sell it. Her face went pale as she realized she had been pulled into a fraudulent situation. She left my porch in a hurry, already dialing her phone to confront Marcus about the lie he had told her. 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was Marcus. I let it ring. Then came the text messages, each one more frantic and angry than the last. He accused me of making a huge mistake and told me I was acting crazy. I did not respond. I just sat on my porch in my rocking chair and waited for the inevitable confrontation. They arrived at noon, screeching into the driveway. Marcus looked like he was about to burst a blood vessel, and Yolanda looked like she wanted to tear me apart. They pounded on the door, but I opened it before they could break the wood. "What did you tell that agent?" Marcus screamed. He told me she was threatening to report him for fraud. I told him I had simply told the truth. I told him this house was not for sale because it had already been sold. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt as if it would crush us all. Marcus stared at me, his mouth hanging open. Yolanda began to shriek about how I was too old to manage things, and how they were my only family. Do you think a person can truly call themselves family while they are actively trying to destroy you? I played the voice recording I had made the night before, the one where they talked about taking my money and putting me away. Their own words filled the air, cold and calculated. Marcus tried to say it was taken out of context, but I then showed them the text messages he had sent to the cousin. There was no room left for lies. I told them to leave my house and never come back. Yolanda lost all pretense of kindness. She hissed that I was a lonely old woman who would die alone in this house, and that no one would find me for weeks. The cruelty in her voice was staggering, but I stood my ground. I told them if they did not leave, I would call the police and report them for elder abuse. They slammed the door so hard a mirror in the hallway shattered. I stood there, shaking from the adrenaline, and realized I had finally cut the cord. But Yolanda's words lingered in my mind. Was I being foolish? Would I regret choosing my dignity over my only son? I went to stay with Sister Martha for a few days to clear my head and find my strength. Martha and her husband, Deacon John, treated me like royalty. We ate good food and prayed together. I realized that family is not just about blood. It is about who stands by you when the storm is at its worst. By the third day, I felt like myself again. I knew I had done the right thing. I was not going to let greed dictate the end of my story. When I returned home, I found a letter from Marcus tucked under the door. It was written on expensive paper, and it was full of apologies. He said he and Yolanda had realized they pushed too hard, and that they were wrong. He asked me to come to dinner that Sunday so they could make amends. He used the word family over and over again, like a magic spell he thought would work on me. I read that letter twice and saw the traps hidden in the phrasing. He did not say he was sorry for trying to steal. He said he was sorry for pushing too hard. He did not say the house was mine. He said I could stay there as long as I wanted. It was a strategic apology, not a genuine one. Then came a text from Yolanda, calling me mother for the first time ever. They started sending flowers and gift baskets, spending money they claimed they did not have. I gave the roses to my neighbor and the food to the church pantry. I knew the difference between a heart that is truly repentant and a person who is just trying a new tactic to get what they want. I did not respond to any of it. On Sunday, Marcus showed up at my door alone. He looked tired and broken. He begged me to come to dinner, and told me Yolanda had made my favorite meal. I looked at my son and asked him to be honest for once in his life. I asked him if he was actually sorry or if he was just scared of the legal consequences I had put in motion. He became defensive immediately. He told me I was being unreasonable, and that mothers are supposed to forgive everything. I told him that forgiveness does not mean allowing someone to continue abusing you. I told him that until he got professional help and learned to stand on his own 2 feet without using me as a bank, we had nothing to talk about. He left in a cloud of desperation, and I felt a strange sense of relief. I went to the library that afternoon, and found that Marcus had been spreading rumors that I was losing my mind. But the people in this community have known me for 40 years. They did not believe him for a second. They stood around me like a fortress of support. I realized that Marcus had underestimated the power of a life lived with integrity. He thought money was the only thing that mattered, but I had a wealth of respect and love that he could never touch. Over the next month, the true extent of his betrayal came to light. Mr. Morrison discovered that Marcus had forged my signature on a power of attorney document months ago. He had used that forged document to take out loans in my name. He had put my entire financial future at risk to maintain a facade of wealth for Yolanda. This was no longer just a family spat. This was a criminal matter. I had to make a choice. Do I protect my son and lose everything, or do I hold him accountable and save myself? What would you do if the person you loved most in the world was the one trying to rob you blind?
I chose accountability.
I moved forward with the charges. The police investigation was thorough, and the evidence was undeniable. Marcus was arrested at his office in Atlanta, in front of all his colleagues. Yolanda's luxury SUV was repossessed because the loans used to buy it were based on the fraud Marcus had committed. The fallout was spectacular. Yolanda left him the moment the money dried up. She did not even wait for the first court hearing. Marcus was left alone, facing the consequences of his actions without the woman he had sacrificed his mother for. It was a bitter irony that I did not take any pleasure in, but I knew it was necessary. The day of the sentencing was one of the hardest days of my life. I sat in that courtroom and watched my son in handcuffs. He looked at me with such hatred, blaming me for everything that had happened. He still could not see that he was the architect of his own prison. The judge sentenced him to 5 years for fraud and elder exploitation. As they led him away, he shouted that I was a cold-hearted woman, and that I had destroyed the family. I did not say a word. I just walked out of that courthouse and breathed in the fresh Georgia air. I had lost a son, but I had gained my life back. I moved into my new cottage by the sea and found a peace I had never known. I spend my days now watching the waves and teaching my granddaughter, Maya, about the importance of boundaries and self-respect. Marcus sends me letters from prison, still asking for money and still refusing to take responsibility. I read them, and then I burn them. I have learned that you cannot help someone who does not want to be saved. Looking back, I realized that my smile that day was the most powerful thing I possessed. It was the smile of a woman who knew her worth and was not afraid to fight for it. I am Hattie Mae Jenkins, and I am not a victim. I am a survivor who knows that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens, learns, and acts when the time is right. Before I close this story, let me say this. Telling stories like this takes something out of me. And if you found any meaning in it, subscribe to Voices of Emily, so we stay connected for the next one. Then share a comment with your thoughts or your experience. I read every one because your perspective matters more than you think. And if this story left an imprint on you, tap the like button so it reaches someone who might be walking through their own version of it tonight. I have learned that kindness without boundaries is just an invitation for people to walk all over you. I have learned that family is a privilege, not a right. And most importantly, I have learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your own story. Thank you for walking this path with me today. May you always have the strength to protect your peace.